Welcome to New Teacher Talk. My name is Anna Quinzio Zaffron, one of the creators of New Teacher Talk, and today I have a very special guest, Cecily Relucio, who is one of my very first students from my very first class when I started as a teacher. Welcome, Cecily. So excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here.
So tell me, Cecily, when we think about those early days of being a student and being a teacher, I know that I wasn't always completely prepared. I had my degree, I was a professional person, but what was probably more important, and one of the things that my cooperating teacher told me, is that to always meet your students with love and care. Because when everything else maybe doesn't work, that love and care will come through. So you've been an educator yourself, Cecily. So talk about maybe our experiences and what we shared those many, many years ago.
Well, I can really see that you took your cooperating teacher's advice to heart and that you not only understood it cognitively, but you lived and breathed it. I've been talking about you a lot lately. Founding an organization is learning how to tell your personal story and your journey. And as I was doing some storytelling, the story of being a student in your classroom came up. And it's one that I've been telling over and over and over again. Because your classroom, your first grade classroom, for me as a 6-year-old child, as a daughter of immigrants from the Philippines, as the only Filipina in my classroom, other than my two sisters, your classroom was a space where I felt that my culture, that my experience, that who I truly was in the world mattered. And not only did it matter, it was something to be known, it was something to be celebrated, to be affirmed. So that when I was a student in your classroom, my family took a trip to my parents' motherland, to the Philippines. It was my first time visiting, it was my sister's first time visiting. And it was a big deal. And you understood that. And you had my classmates create this giant Bon Voyage card. I think it was probably bigger than me at one point. It was so big that it had to be rolled up in one of those cardboard tubes. And that made me feel so seen and so heard, and like my life story mattered. And I tell the story because it's a beautiful example of that love and care that should be the foundation of every classroom. And I also tell the story because it is the only time from kindergarten all the way through graduate school that I experienced that kind of love and care and affirmation of who I am culturally and ethnically in my entire schooling experience until I was in my doctoral program. So I also share that story as a way to help us understand that there is an absence, there is a lack. It is not a common practice for young people, especially young Black, Indigenous people of color, to be fully seen and heard and affirmed in their classrooms by their teachers.
For me, it really is important. And you tell your immigrant story, but my family were immigrants as well from Italy. And my father would tell stories about the fact that he would hide his books in the ditch because the teacher didn't particularly like little Italian boys.
Mm.
And she didn't think they were very smart. At that time, all of the teachers were Irish people, and they didn't enjoy the fact that the Italians had come to their town. And so he felt that he was being dismissed. That story and that idea just keeps resonating throughout all of history.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. I think, again, gives me some insight into who you were entering into the classroom. that you were closely connected to your family's immigration experience and the deeply unfortunate and harmful othering and alienation that can happen, which is, so ironic given that the United States is a settler colony. The only people who are truly from here are Native peoples, indigenous peoples. They're really truly the only ones that can make that claim of this place, and yet that it's just such a normalized attitude, sort of anti-immigrant sentiment and belief system that, persists to this day.
The idea of othering is sad in our country's history because we often other the indigenous people and think about the history that we've had with them, that we've taken away their lands, we've taken away their language, and this was their country. So for me, often we think about the way that we act toward people who are coming to America in the same way that everyone else who really lives in this country did. And yet we're saying that sometimes certain people's immigration has been more important than other people's immigration. When we're supposed to be a land where we are a great mosaic of people with differences, and that each piece in that mosaic should be celebrated because it creates a whole beautiful picture.
I think that that is the potential of what we could be. And I think that there are many people who aspire for us to truly live into that potential. But in order for us to be able to do that, I think the thing that we have not figured out how to do at a large scale, with everybody at the table is like a true reckoning. We've done a lot of things as a country that have been very much counter to the great mosaic. I believe that in order for us to live into that potential, we have to do more of the truth telling and the reckoning work.
We do, and that has to start in our classrooms
Yes.
because school is an experience that everyone has. As teachers in classrooms, we have to always be cognizant of the people that we have in front of us, as well as the people that we might not be seeing in our classrooms. We have to be sure that we are being respectful of everyone and that we bring to our students stories of the people in front of us, but also those stories of people that we don't necessarily see in our communities. It was really the case in our situation, Cecily. Our community was primarily a white community with people that were often distrustful of anyone else that hadn't been born and had their family there for many generations. I saw, especially with my experience during my student teaching, of working in a school where primarily the focus of students were kids from public housing projects and the importance of believing in them, believing in their agency to become something that they wanted to be, and to be someone outside their family to show them that we believe in you and that we care about you.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I think a lot of the work of becoming an educator and being an educator is about becoming aware of beliefs that we maybe don't even understand. They're not even operating on a conscious level. It's like the water that we're swimming in. We don't even know sometimes that we're in the water. And unsettling those beliefs or understanding that not everything that we've been conditioned to believe is true or, is really in alignment with our values. I think that really getting at what the underlying beliefs are is so important. A person is going to take on the responsibility of becoming an educator and an educator for all children. that they have to come to terms with. What do they believe? Because those beliefs are going to be translated into behaviors and actions and decisions that will have a really profound impact on how young people feel about themselves, whether or not they feel a sense of belonging, whether they love themselves, whether or not they see themselves as part of a greater whole, as part of a community, as part of a collective. I'm so grateful that I had you in first grade. I had you, in a really formative time in my life where I could experience like what is possible or what was possible in a classroom. And that has stayed with me. It's been a very enduring, lasting impression that you left. I believe that I took that same belief into my classroom as a new teacher. And I had really wonderful intentions of being an affirming teacher, of being culturally affirming, being students' languages. And teaching is really hard work. It's a lifelong practice to find ways to provide young people with love and care, oftentimes within systems and structures that are not loving and are not caring of people's humanity.
And this is true, Cecily. One of the things that I've noticed as generations of teachers have kept coming along, that sometimes the systems, and I think about the system when I began, really it was about the connection we made to the students, how we delivered content to you, that we were knowledgeable about our content, but we had more options to be able to personalize that for our students. We didn't always have to be on the same page of the textbook. If our students weren't ready for something new, we had the ability to make professional decisions on our own, that we were going to stay on this topic for a few more days, or look at a different way, or take a break from it and come back to it, that we didn't have to worry about that test that was coming, that we could allow students to just be open. It was just more organic. And now I feel so often that teachers have so much pressure placed upon them that they're not able to take the time and the space and the breath to form those relationships and really look at the students and the community that you're working within, that there's so much pressure. And I feel that we had that time to really connect with people. We had that space that was a little bit more open, that gave us a little bit more latitude to get to know our students, to celebrate them as people, not just bodies to be educated or brains to be educated.
Yeah, I think that we've seen a real paradigm shift in education over the last 30 to 40 years. A lot of the educational policies that were set that were really pushing standardization, especially high stakes standardized testing, teacher evaluation. And I think a lot of that has shifted what the profession has become. And it's really more than just unfortunate, it's actually incredibly harmful to young people, first and foremost, as well as to educators. And I think a lot of that has been also rooted in an erosion of public trust in our profession and intentional undermining of teachers and of public education, and kind of this rhetoric or narrative of failure. I think it's done a lot of harm to the profession, and it has undermined teacher autonomy and teacher professional decision making. I'm glad to have been educated, not in that era. And I'm also grateful that I was a classroom teacher a little bit before all of that was really taking hold. No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, high stakes standardized testing. I was in the classroom just as those things were starting to take hold. And so I think it's a really different time. And I think it's also part of why, and I imagine it may be true for you too, that a lot of the work that I do is about advocating for teachers within this environment that has really sought to take the power of teachers away.
I agree with you completely, Cecily. That's one of the reasons that we started New Teacher Talk is that we believe in the power of the young person's voice. We believe in the teacher. We see that young people come to this profession, and I always want to say that we are professionals in a world where policies have slapped at us right and left to deprofessionalize and depersonalize who we as educators truly are at our hearts. And looking at young people today who go into this profession, most of the time when you ask them, they're doing it because they want to make a difference in the world. That's why. And they come into the profession feeling powerful, thinking that I can make changes. And then policy comes and it knocks them down.
Yeah.
And that's when many young people leave the profession because they think they can't make a difference. So, what advice would you give to a young teacher today to stay the course?
Mm. Yeah, I think that my advice is multi-pronged. The first being you can't do it alone. And yet we exist in a society that values independence, the rugged individual, the self-made person. And I think that that's a myth. I think that that's a falsehood. And so teaching is definitely a profession that can't do it alone. We need each other. And teachers are needing and deserving of love and care and community in order to be sustainable in the work. And then we also need that community to learn and grow and continue to evolve and continue to hone our practice. And we can only do that in community, right? Learning is a communal act. Learning is socially constructed. We don't really learn anything completely on our own. And so teaching is a profession, it's a practice, it's an ongoing lifelong journey of like becoming our full, most capable selves and creating that space for young people. I think finding your people in the profession, people who share the same vision, the same values, who aspire to live in a world and build that world together with you and with your students, I think is key. And then I think the other thing is to really build a structural analysis of why do our school systems operate the way that they do? Who sets policy, right? Who makes the decisions that govern our lives as educators? Because I think once we understand that, then we begin to become more politically engaged. We begin to get more involved around who gets to make decisions, right? And how can we ensure that young people and families and educators always have a voice at the table? We get involved in organizing, right? We get involved in advocating for policies that are going to hold the love of young people at the center. I think that continued building of a critical understanding and a critical analysis of what are all of the forces and conditions that shape the teaching and learning that happens in your classroom is really critical, because your classroom is a microcosm of systems upon systems upon, ecosystems. And if we don't understand how those systems are shaping the conditions, that we teach within and that our young people learn within, it's going to be much harder to navigate. So those are a little bit of the advice that I would give.
What I'd like to do now, I'd really like to honor the work that you've been doing, Cecily. You have created Umuwi Ethnic Studies. And how did you decide to move from the classroom into something new and different? What propelled you?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, to speak about it. The author, Toni Morrison, has this quote, something that she said, which is, if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So for me, I've worked as a classroom educator, as an instructional coach, as a professional developer in nonprofits, in universities, in a lot of different spaces. All of those experiences have been incredibly valuable. And I think they have prepared me to take this leap of faith to build the thing that doesn't exist, that I want to exist for myself, for all of the educators that I know and love, and for my own children and other people's children. So I think for me, it was about taking everything that I've experienced and learned and all of these amazing relationships that I have and building the thing that I want to have in the world and that I believe needs to exist. So Umuwi means to return home in Tagalog, which is one of the many languages of the Philippines, which is my mother tongue that was actually taken from me. I am not fluent in Tagalog because one of the pressures that my parents felt to assimilate was not to teach us our mother tongue. So that has been a source of a lot of loss and pain, especially when I became a mother and realized I could not pass my language on to my daughters. And it has also been this space for some healing and some reclaiming. So I was really intentional about wanting to name my organization and have that linguistic expression of who I am in the world. And the reason why home and returning home was a really important theme is because ethnic studies to me is about that reclaiming, that remembering who we truly are in all of our fullness and wholeness. And ethnic studies creates that space. One of the ways that we talk about Umuwi Ethnic Studies is to talk about ethnic studies as our home place. And so home place is drawing from the work of Bell Hooks, the late Bell Hooks, also an author. She would write about creation of home, particularly in Black families and by Black women, recognizing Black people as the descendants of enslaved Africans. So recognizing home as this really important site of resistance, of creating safety and affirmation and healing, and of restoring the dignity of people within a context and within a society that was deeply violent and very, very harmful to people of color. So that for me is what ethnic studies is. So I'll talk a little bit about ethnic studies. So as I shared earlier, Anna, in your first grade classroom, I felt really deeply seen. And that was so important for me. And at the same time, that was the only time through the majority of my schooling experience that I felt that affirmation in a formal classroom setting. So school was, for the most part, a pretty alienating experience for me. I was academically really very capable and I could do school, but my relationship, a healthy relationship to learning for me came much later. I became an educator, and for my first 10 years as an educator, a lot of what I was being taught in my pre-service program and by my school leaders, what I was being told to do, it didn't resonate. Felt there was a disconnect. It didn't feel relevant. It didn't equip me to truly meet the needs of the young people that I was teaching or of the educators that I was coaching and developing. And then in the early 2010s, when I was directing a teacher education program in the diversity and social justice class that I was a co-teacher for, we watched a documentary called Precious Knowledge. And the documentary was about the Mexican American Studies program, the ethnic studies program in Tucson, Arizona. And it was this incredible, deeply transformative story about the power of Mexican American studies and the power of these educators who created space for young people to learn about oppression, systemic oppression, to learn about the assets and the beauty of our cultures, of our histories. It is also about how that program was dismantled by the state of Arizona, by legislators and high level educational administrators in the state, how the program was attacked, deemed illegal, and laws were passed to declare that it was illegal to teach Mexican American studies and all forms of ethnic studies in the state of Arizona. For me, the first time watching the film and every other time that I've watched it since then, and I've watched it many, many times, just evoked this really deep response in my soul, in my heart, that was both about grief of like, what would my life had been like if I had had the opportunity to learn about my people, about my history, about our contributions at any point during my educational trajectory. It was a response of deep, deep rage that this program could be taken away from these young people who clearly were connecting with school and connecting with their teachers on a very profound level. Also was an experience that motivated me and inspired me to learn more about this thing called ethnic studies, to learn about its history, to learn about how to educate in a way that is grounded and rooted in ethnic studies. And that experience really changed my life. It changed my entire trajectory as an educator. It gave me a community, a home where I could learn to truly become educator that I was being called to be. You know, there were communities of educators who had been carrying this out. It changed my life. It saved my life. It helped me to understand myself differently. It helped me to heal parts of my identity that were not fully whole and fully formed. It helped me learn how to love myself, you know, my heritage, my people in a very different way. And so, you know, talking with people who have experienced ethnic studies, who are practitioners of ethnic studies, the story that I just shared is a very common story. You know, people will say, you know, without hyperbole, without exaggerating, like ethnic studies changed my life. And, you know, ethnic studies is a way of being in the world. And so that's what I want to protect and sustain. And that is the thing that I want to exist in the world here in Chicago. And that doesn't exist yet. And that's not to say that there aren't educators who are practicing ethnic studies, who are teaching for social justice, who are teaching in anti-racist ways. I want to be really careful about like, I'm trying to create this from scratch. No, it's really more about creating a home place for all of us who are doing this work already to continue our resistance work, to continue really courageous work, and to experience love and care as we engage in that really difficult work.
And so you speak about finding others, that we have pockets of educators who believe in ethnic studies. And one of the things that you spoke about was the fact that students, Hispanic students, weren't able to learn about their Mexican culture when they live moments away from their home country, and that that was deemed illegal. And we often talk about these dual language classrooms, but we don't always think about them as being dual culture classrooms,
Yes.
because the culture is part of the language. And for us to be able to persist in our use of our home language, we also need to understand our home culture, because they go hand in
Yeah.
hand.
Yes.
And so, how can others advocate to ensure that ethnic studies become part of a school curriculum, a wide school curriculum? And how do we get people to put them in practice? Because one of the things that I've noticed is that there's been a pushback here in the state of Illinois, and I can only speak to our state. And as the state has developed culturally responsive standards, we still have teachers that say, this isn't for me. I push back at this. Why would I teach these standards when my community doesn't reflect these individuals or these groups? Could you speak to that a bit, Cecily?
Yes, absolutely. One response I have to what you just said is everybody has culture, everybody has language. It's just that sometimes there's this sort of taking for granted that white, Eurocentric, English dominant culture is the standard, right? I think what the culturally responsive teaching leading standards are really intended to do is, as an educator, I need to be aware of how my culture and my language, like how that shapes how I move through the world and how I teach. And then how is that interacting with the culture and the language of the young people that I'm in relationship with? And how do I ensure, especially if I'm of the dominant culture and language, that it's not dominating and it's not resulting in a devaluation or erasure of another person's. Our language and our culture are so core to who we are in the world, how we understand, how we communicate, how we process and make meaning of the world around us. So, one, we all have a culture and a language. So, to say like this doesn't have relevance, I think that resistance is actually about something else. So, as far as advocating, we all have a role to play. For those of us who believe in ethnic studies, who believe in anti racist or anti oppressive education, if we believe in social justice, if we believe that we live in a society that needs to be transformed, then we all have to take an active role. We all have to be actively engaged. Since I know that you have an audience that is national and international, what I would say is to get involved and to stay informed about what is happening in your community, in your district, your city, and your state with regard to educational policy. In the US, educational policy is set at the state level in particular, as well as the local level. So getting informed around what are the policies, who's driving and influencing and advocating, really engaging critically with like what is the intent of that policy and what are going to be the consequences if this policy is passed. And then finding and building with others who are willing to make a commitment to defend the freedom to learn and the teaching of truth. In Illinois, Anna, as you've mentioned, we're fortunate for now to have an educational policy foundation that is supportive of ethnic studies, of culturally responsive teaching in curriculum and in instruction. In addition to really responsive teaching and learning standards, we have instructional mandates around Asian American history, Black history, the study of disability history and people and rights. And we were one of the first states to declare and pass policy making book bans unlawful. And then in Chicago, we have a mayoral administration currently and an appointed board of education that is very serious about racial justice, including a commitment to ensuring all students have access to high quality, culturally responsive, anti-racist instruction. So I share all of this to demonstrate that it is possible to fight for a different vision than the one that is making a lot of headlines, that is, unfolding in a lot of other cities and states. It's not predestined that we are going to head into this direction that is really about the stripping of rights and educational freedoms and multiracial history, right? That is a more complete history. That it is possible to fight for a more inclusive, multiracial, democratic vision of what the country should be and how the foundation for that is built in our classrooms and schools.
And that's so true, Cecily. Our classrooms are that microcosm of the greater world. And when we can make our classrooms reflective of caring about all individuals, all cultures, and respecting every culture's role in the way that America has prospered over the many years of our country, I think only then can we really say that we're really doing a good service in public education.
Yeah, and truly living into that potential, right, that we spoke of earlier. The answer to really becoming a multiracial, pluralistic democracy is to engage in democratic acts of being engaged, knowing what's going on, exercising our voice, building collectives of people, and building power toward that very agenda that is truly about the practice of democracy and collectivist society.
Yeah. And so, if people have been intrigued by what you've been speaking about and would like to know more about Umuwi and the work that you do, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
You can find Umuwi Ethnic Studies on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook. We also have a website. So Umuwi is spelled Umuwi Ethnic Studies. So our website is www.umuwiethnicstudies.org. I'm also on LinkedIn, and so that's a great way to connect with me. And if you go to our website, you can also contact us in that way. We're a pretty new organization. We're just coming up on 2 years. And so we're learning and we're evolving and, we're having a lot of fun and trying a lot of things out to see how we can just connect with people who are passionate about an education that prepares our young people to transform society. And so we would love to connect with as many people as possible who share that same vision.
And we will put all of that information in our show notes as well, so that they will be easily able to contact you. And I want to thank you so much, Cecily, for being our guest today. And I want to thank our listeners for listening and hope that everyone becomes a regular follower of the podcast channel. And to remember that as a new teacher, we're here for you.